To continue with our program, please welcome Tyrone Lobban, Head of Blockchain Launch for JPMorgan Chase & Co., and Karl Gouverneur, Chief Technology Officer, Struction, to demystify blockchain, past, present, and future.
Welcome, everyone. I'm joined here by Tyrone Lobban. My name is Karl Gouverneur, and we're going to be talking about distributed ledger technology, blockchain, crypto, just give you some ideas of what's going on with some trends and other things in the world of blockchain. I work in a digital startup, fintech. I'm a recovering Fortune 100 CIO. I've been in the startup world now for about a year and a half. I retired from Northwestern Mutual just before COVID started. And it's great. I'll tell you all about what we're doing and my relationships with the world of blockchain. Tyrone, how about introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're up to?
Thanks, Karl. And yeah, hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. So I'm Tyrone. I run the blockchain and crypto team here at JPMorgan, which essentially allows me to work with each of our businesses across the bank to really identify how we can take advantage of this new technology. So I work with each business to create new products and solutions, really taking them from an idea, just a concept, actually building out products and launching those into production. I also run a platform called Onyx Digital Assets, which is a platform that we've launched last year focusing on the tokenization of different types of assets that you can put on a blockchain. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I've been in the blockchain space for about 5 years and have been at JPMorgan for about 18. So Karl, I'm not on your side of the fence at this point in time.
No.
And very much embedded in the blockchain ecosystem. I'm on the board of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and was actually part of the original founding group that created the Quorum platform that we recently actually spun out to a company called Consensus. So great to be with you all today.
Yeah, it really is great to be here. And I think you'll get a perspective on one end, what's happening in the enterprise with a player like JPMorgan Chase and all the things they're doing. And you'll also hear my perspective, what's happening perhaps in some of the startup world where blockchain continues to be a big source of innovation. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Tyrone, we probably have a lot of people connected to this show that has heard about blockchain, maybe has heard of distributed ledger technology, but why don't we baseline everybody on what this is? I'll get us started with when my cousin or my mom or somebody in the family asks me, so what is this crypto stuff? What is this blockchain? Should I care about this? And so let me give you let me share a definition, and maybe you can help me expand with a little deeper, more, let's just say some of the properties of it. So I define blockchain very simply, and you can look it up on Wikipedia, and of course you'll have a long paragraph of what they define it. But very simply for me, it's a database without a delete key. That's it. It's a database where you can add data, but you cannot remove it. It is immutable. There are some additional properties, like in some cases, like the Bitcoin blockchain has properties of being somewhat anonymous, permissionless, distributed, secure, all these other properties. And then there's other blockchains that have an application layer on top of it, like Ethereum with the distributed application layer. But the fundamental thing that I want people to understand is that a blockchain is the data layer without a delete key. Tyrone, what do you think of that simple definition?
I actually haven't heard that before, so I love it. I love hearing the new ways of describing these things. I mean, that's definitely correct. I would add a couple more things. One is, as you said, this is a database that is replicated and shared, right? So essentially, everyone has a copy of the database, but importantly, an exact copy. There is no difference between your version of events and my version of events. And this is where we get this idea of shared ledgers or distributed ledgers. A couple other things to note is that we use the word blockchain, but actually there are many types of blockchains. You spoke about Bitcoin and Ethereum. There are a number of other types as well. And that is important to understand because they all work differently, right? And actually they solve different problems. So when we talk about blockchain, and equally when we talk about crypto, we should try and be a bit more precise about which properties we're focusing on, or what the actual functionality that we're getting from a particular blockchain may be. And then another sort of key difference to call out, or point to call out, is that some blockchains are open, open access. Anyone can access those blockchains. So you'll hear them being referred to as public blockchains. This is like, Bitcoin and Ethereum are the classic examples. And then you get permissioned blockchains, which is, almost a closed environment where you do have to be onboarded onto that specific ledger. And we see permissioned blockchains, occur in traditional industries, financial services, etc., where, perhaps we're not as comfortable as just accessing the same environment that, anyone else in the world can access. So there are some differences here.
One thing I will add is, in addition to open and let's just say closed blockchains, you also have hybrids, ones that mix a little bit of both. Yeah. Those exist too.
Yeah, and I think that's going to actually be, become more and more important as we progress along the path of this technology, because you will get some companies and industries being comfortable with some aspects of a public blockchain, but not others. And so you'll have this sort of mixture. I think the last thing I would say is just, in terms of the why, like, why does this technology exist? I mean, it really is created to enable a better way of exchanging information, exchanging value as well, often without the need to have intermediaries, sitting in between two different participants. And that we are seeing, a lot of value and innovation as a result of that. And then the other thing is that they actually enable the creation and the storage of assets, of digital assets. And that has actually sparked an entire new, not only generation of products, but also an incredible amount of innovation in terms of the different types of services that people are now creating, because they have this access to essentially the ability to create any sort of economy that you want. So just, a couple of points that I think are interesting to note.
Yeah, well, I'll end us here by saying one important aspect neither one of us mentioned is the consensus mechanism. So that is the algorithms, the logic by which these blockchains govern how records and eventually blocks get added to the database.
Yep.
In the case of Bitcoin, it is called proof of work. In essence, proving that you burned enough electricity and you solved a cryptographic puzzle so that you can add a block to the blockchain. There's other consensus mechanisms out there, like Ethereum moving from proof of work to proof of stake. And then there's others that are native proof of stake. And then there's a bunch of other ones that exist out there. Again, this is the mechanism that allows the database to be distributed and allows it to be in sync across the world.
Yep. Yeah, I that is absolutely critical. The last thing I will say, I'll just add on to your last point very quickly. The way that I think about blockchain sometimes is, when we think back to the late 90s, early 90s, late 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going back. When we had the
face commit. Two-face commit.
Yeah. Not only that, but just the creation of the web, right? We have obviously the internet forming over a number of decades before, and then we had the creation of the web. And what the web actually allowed us to do, what it enabled us, was to have a voice, right? All of a sudden, anyone could write a blog post, put up a website, and get information out into the ether in one sense. And that was hugely liberating for people, and also actually essentially democratized, the publishing industry in some sense.
Content. Yeah.
And I think what we now have with blockchain is quite like you could create a blog in 1994 or whatever the case is. Now you can create an asset. You can create an economy around that asset and marketplaces around that asset just as easily. And I think that's really where a lot of the interesting stuff is. And so I think there's a really nice parallel between the two kind of evolutions of open technologies, really.
Yeah, the way I've talked about it is going from, so the web gave us the internet of information, a web of information, whereas now with blockchain, we're creating an internet of value, a storage of value and digital assets that can be stored. That brings me to kind of a next topic that we want to cover in this conversation, and that is trends. Now, I did some research ahead of this. I've been researching blockchain trends for a while, and I came up with a list of 34 different trends. Obviously, we're not going to cover them all here, but I did segment them into kind of consumer, public-facing retail trends, and I'll name a few. And then there is more the enterprise-related trends, the things that companies like JP Morgan are more interested going forward in understanding where the puck is going. I'm going to ask you in a minute, Tyrone, if you can maybe elaborate on some of those things that you see that impact the enterprise. But before that, I'll just run a list of things that I thought would be interesting for people to, they probably hear about it. They are trending these days. And I'll just give a very brief definition, and then I'll let you talk about maybe identity or what's happening in the enterprise. So here we go. I'm just going to rattle the list. Everybody heard of NFT? Those are non-fungible tokens. Very popular these days. In fact, I have a copy of a rock, a JPEG on my phone that sold for millions of dollars. And you may be wondering, who the heck does this? Well, people do it. No different than when Twitter came out in 2006, maybe, and you wondered, who the heck is going to be doing tweets? And it is now a platform, one of the big platforms for social media. But that is a rather, that is the collectible space is just one use case for NFTs. If you think of an NFT is nothing but a digital address inside of the blockchain that points to the asset that may be either digitized or it could be physical. You can think of an NFT as a baseball card. That could be an NFT. You can think of an NFT as a digital video of LeBron James scoring a dunk, and it's yours, unique, you own it, you have proof of ownership. So that's NFT. Real estate could be tokenized into NFTs. So that's another trend that we see, and we may talk a little bit about that. Decentralized finance, DeFi, is another one that is a very trendy thing these days. You have TradFi, or traditional finance. Think of JP Morgan falling in that category, the legacy business of JP Morgan. You have centralized finance. Think of some of these players like Coinbase or BlockFi or Kraken. They are a company that is playing in the crypto space in the financial. But then you have decentralized finance. And Tyrone, you alluded to it a minute ago. It's all of these new ways of transacting that leverage the blockchain and basically run automatically without the need of a central organization. So DeFi, another interesting trend out there. I can't go without talking about trends without mentioning meme coins. I'm only going to mention meme coins and I'm done. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because do that at your own risk. Central bank digital currency, CBDCs. China is well ahead in this space. I know JP Morgan has also been working with the government, the US government, the UK government, to figure out what does this mean. This would be a coin that is issued by central banks. Other trends out there like Web3, DAOs. I can go on. Tyrone, how about you take a little deeper cut into either any of these or something else that you may know about?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I want to call out is everything you just said has actually started to boom in the last 2 years, maybe, right? The rate of change in the space is literally phenomenal. It is incredible how much is happening so quickly. I mean, this is my job 24/7. This is what I do, and I can't keep up. So, for people who are not directly in the space, I know how daunting it can seem, and it can be. But I think some of these trends that you called out, really do have legs. And I wanted to add a few points to each of them. So from an NFT perspective, as you said, it's hard to understand sometimes, like why would I pay money for this digital picture that I can get for free, essentially? Like, why am I doing that? There are reasons. People like original art. They like original goods. That's the reason why you have collectibles in some sense. So, there's a segment of people who just want to have the original, something that came directly from the creator. I think what we're seeing actually with NFTs is this really interesting engagement model, right? So what we're seeing is brands are able to connect with their consumers, their customers, in new ways by essentially issuing scarce or limited NFTs of something about the brand, that for those customers who actually receive them can now get access to unique experiences or unique things from that specific company. And so it's almost, there's a sort of glimmer of this being a loyalty play in some sense, where you're actually getting utility from these scarce items as well as status, right? You can show that you're in a unique club who's owning something that is provably scarce, and maybe as a result has some value. So I think the NFT story is more than just, hey, it's JPEGs. And as you pointed out, you can represent any kind of unique asset as a non-fungible token. Cars is a good
like
one.
real estate, like real estate.
Yeah.
And now this gets real with real estate, correct?
Yeah, and we should definitely chat about that. DeFi, the thing about DeFi that is most interesting to us from a JP Morgan perspective is obviously this is finance, right? This is literally the things that we do without us. It's lending, it's borrowing, it's creating derivatives, it's asset management. And the reason why this is coming into being or has been able to come into being is because of these open access, open source protocols that leverage this technology that can hold assets, right? And so what that actually means is you can do business with someone. I can give you a loan, Karl, if I never met you before, and you can put up some asset as collateral that I know if you don't give me my money back, then I'm going to get access to those assets. And I don't need to know your bank account. You don't need to know my bank account. We can interact on this open ledger. All I need to know is your blockchain address, and you essentially have trust baked into the protocol and the interaction, right? And that's why DeFi is so interesting. And the ways that I think this can go is, it's wide. It's huge in terms of the.
I think the possibilities are endless. Yeah.
So that's I think something that we're definitely focusing on as well, is how we can get to understand and play with the space a little bit more. You mentioned Web3 and identity, and maybe I'll just close my thoughts on those two. The term Web3 versus the original Web2, as often referred to as, Web3 essentially turns the internet from a renter's ecosystem where we are renting space. We are the product of many companies because of advertising. We don't necessarily own digital items that we've accrued in different worlds. Think about a game that you might play, like an online game or something like that, where you spent maybe hundreds of hours perfecting that game or moving up the levels, earning lots of different items in that game, whether it be new weapons or hats or I don't know, whatever digital item it is. But the thing is, you're locked into that game, right? If you move to another game, all of that sweat equity is basically gone. So you're essentially renting those assets. Web3 enables, through these same concepts of open source protocols, digital assets, and smart contracts, is all of those assets become portable. You actually now become the owner of those assets and can move them to any domain that you would like. And that's really the essence of Web3. We're becoming owners of these digital assets. And an important tie-in to that is identity. Quite similar to the fact that we don't necessarily own our assets, we also very freely give up our identities every day online, right? You go onto a website, a whole bunch of things pop up and say, are you okay with us collecting all this information? And you just click yes, because you want to access the content. I think there's an emerging trend of people maybe not being so okay with that. You want to have more control over your data. You want to have more privacy around your information. And in the same way that this technology allows you to own your assets, you can also own your identity. And you can provide stronger guarantees of who you are by leveraging, some low-level technology concepts like digital signatures or private keys, which we don't need to get into, but they essentially allow you to prove irrefutably that, hey, this is me. And also, I'm only going to share with you the things that I want to share with you. and you don't actually have rights over that information because it's ultimately mine. So I think there's a very big theme coming around digital identity, certainly something we're very focused on here, and I'm personally very excited about.
So, Tyrone, I was smiling a little bit when you talked about all your assets inside of a game. I have a 23-year-old son who is in law school. And of course, you can imagine 10 years ago, 15 years ago, he was an avid Xbox or PlayStation, whatever console I had at those days in 2005, 6, 7. And I remember giving him prepaid cards for $100 so he can buy weapons and he can buy suits and other things.
Yeah.
All the way up to when he became a Fortnite player. I know that he was at that point, it was like watching my credit card transactions, right? Because he was old enough to do it himself.
Yeah.
And now he was telling me that he got a sword in a game that he plays, that he can actually take that sword from one game to another game because the sword has value. Right. And his sword has actually appreciated in value because the sword keeps track of the kills that he has during a game.
Right.
Now, maybe this is a classic case of I'm just too old to even accept that that's the case. But that is a tremendous amount of economic value that gets created as a result of this, because I must have spent a couple $1,000s in gaming, the CD-ROM that you get and you put in the game, and all of that is being completely blasted. And that's just one use case with gaming on top of a blockchain.
Yeah, so, and what that actually is provenance, right? It's provenance of
yes.
the history of that item. And I think that's also why we're seeing brands and celebrities get involved in this space, because if you're a celebrity and you've owned some digital item, choose your celebrity and choose some accessory that celebrity has in the digital world. If they now sell that on, the person that they're buying from is provably buying from someone famous, right? And that makes that thing more valuable. And then, as I said, you end up creating these markets and economies around these things. So this idea of the immutable ledger without a delete key just enables so much down the line.
Yeah, another place where a blockchain I've noticed, so I collect watches, and I just purchased a watch the other day from one of the main brands, who the proof of ownership is not a paper receipt that you walk away with, but the proof of ownership is an app where you enter the information and you are on a blockchain as owner of that watch. So when you sell it, you have proof of provenance and identity for a legitimate watch, as opposed to sending it to somebody and risking that something happens so they can prove that it's a watch and then shipping it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. The possibilities are endless. Why don't we move on to another topic?
Sounds good.
So we covered a lot of trends. Let's talk about use cases. Let's talk about use cases, and in particular, because we're going to have a lot of people that come from the enterprise, listening to this. Let's talk about use cases. I'll talk about one from my past life in the insurance world. Maybe you can come up with a couple of use cases that come from the banking, wealth management, financial services world. So I'll start with this. Let's call it crop insurance. So Tyrone, you are a farmer in Florida, growing 10 acres of oranges, and it's January, and all of a sudden, and you do have crop insurance, protect you against a weather issue. It's January, and you get a freeze, and it's 20, and your contract with the insurance company says, if you do get a freeze and your crops, get to a certain point, whatever the math and the science behind freezing crops, you're insured. You get your whatever, $1 million. So let's just say, Tyrone, that you indeed experience this weather challenge. I'll ask you, what is the first thing you got to do?
Got to call up your insurance.
Got to call the insurance company, right?
Yeah.
And you got to go through the experience that the insurance company provides, whether it's downloading a form or loading the data online or making a phone call. And then 2 weeks later, somebody shows up on your property. They look around, they see all the bad oranges, and then they go back to the mothership. Maybe they take some pictures, and then, the process goes and goes and goes. And if things go well, you get your $1 million, maybe in a paper check, or if you're lucky, a wire. That probably took a month or two, but you got your money. That is current experience. What you can do with a blockchain and what you can do with a smart contract, which we haven't spoke much about, but it's the underpinnings. Think of those as the apps that live on your phone. These are apps that live on top of a blockchain. So the smart contract, which is code, and it's immutable code, that code, think about this. You can have sensors in your farm. It detects the temperature. It measures the reader. It immediately realizes, oh, wait a minute, this is an event. It sends the data to the blockchain. The smart contract executes, and the next day, money's in your bank.
Yep.
Significantly better experience for the end user, and also transparency across the board.
Yep. And provable events, right? Provable events.
Right. It is not up to a human. Exactly. It is not up to a human to say, hey, wait a minute, it was only 21 degrees. You know, there are what are known as oracles in the blockchain world, which are provable sources of data that are cleansed. Think of this as pure, since the blockchain is immutable, you better make sure your data is clean. You no longer can afford to have, oh, well, yeah, that data was no good, because then the record is immutable. So that's just one example. What do you see in the world of banking and or other financial services?
Yeah, I mean, what I want to start with is, you know, we're obviously quite passionate about blockchain, and I remember when I started, it seemed like blockchain was going to solve all problems in the world, and I think we've proved that that is not the case. You know, over the past 5 years, we've done something like 80 to 100 different proofs of concepts and experiments, and I will tell you, the vast majority of them did not need a blockchain. Probably, you know, there's a lot that you can do just fine with regular way technology, and so I think part of the the learnings that we've gained is when to apply this technology, where that actually does make sense. And so I want to talk about two use cases where I think we found like a really great use of blockchain. The first is around how this technology can enable information to be shared more seamlessly and more in a better trusted way. And the second is how value can actually be transferred in a more optimal way. So the first use case around information sharing actually centers in our cross-border payments business. Now, the way that cross-border payments actually work, you know, if you're sitting in the States or trying to make a payment to, I don't know, somewhere in Southeast Asia or something, there is no global payment system that you can just do that over, right? There's actually a series of what are referred to as correspondent banks, which are banks in different countries that have contractual relationships with each other to enable the flow of funds across borders. And that's all well and good. You know, cross-border payments for the most part works well. It might be a bit expensive, but it works. The challenge is that in that payments flow, if in my payments to you, one of us is actually flagged on some sanctions list, one of the banks has our name or a name similar to us as someone they shouldn't be doing business with, the payment just stops. And at that point, you actually get into a whole world of manual recovery where each of these banks in this chain basically have to try and get hold of each other and ask for more information. And the information might be as simple as, I need clarification on this person's name, or I need clarification on this person's date of birth. And there are emails and Excel files and phone calls that get passed back and forth all the way up this daisy chain back to the original sending bank. And a process that should have taken just 2 days or so to actually send money internationally has now taken 2 weeks. And so what we actually did was we came up with an application that allows for this global set of correspondent banks to all operate on the same blockchain network and to interact with each other in a peer-to-peer way, so that when some of these sanctions flags happen, there's no longer this indirect route back to the original bank. You can literally just get hold of them through these standard APIs, a single standard API that you can talk to any bank through. And all of a sudden, we're actually resolving these same problems in minutes. And this has been a hugely impactful a challenge that we've solved for, which has now resulted in this network, which we call the Link network, having 400 global banks on top of this network, and actually using this shared infrastructure to do a whole host of other things. So not just checking, are you on the sanctions list, but hey, is this account that I'm about to pay actually open at your bank and active? And what is the activity that's been happening over the past 6 months? These are questions that are very difficult to answer if you're not on the same shared infrastructure, operating through the same APIs and standard contracts. And I think this has been hugely exciting. We've been live with this particular network for about 3 years now, and as I said, 400 banks is about the largest permission network there is today. So that's on the information exchange side. On the value exchange side, I think another really interesting use case, and this comes back to this idea of tokenization or representing an asset on a blockchain, is something that we launched into production last year. It's essentially a financing application. We call it the Intraday Repo solution. And the problem that we were looking to solve is we have lots of clients who borrow funds from us during the day to meet their intraday financing needs, making payroll or some FX or paying suppliers, whatever the case is. Those intraday financing needs are met by them drawing down on a credit line. They just draw down on that line. Now, for some of our clients, specifically banks and broker dealers, they actually have to hold reserves on their balance sheet when they draw down on those lines, because they have to prove to regulators during times of stress that, hey, if JP Morgan withdraws that credit line, you can still pay your suppliers or meet your outgoing obligations. And so it's actually costly for them. What we did was we essentially created a product that allows them to put up collateral during the day. So secured, this loan now becomes secured, and borrow against that collateral. And they do this through a repo transaction or a repurchase agreement. Repurchase agreements are one of the largest mechanisms for financing today. They're actually essentially what makes the economy spin, but they cannot be used for intraday purposes because it's very difficult to put up collateral and then get back the collateral on the same day. When we can now tokenize collateral like Apple stock or US treasuries, and we can tokenize cash in the form of another product called JP Morgan Coin, we can actually swap those two things simultaneously, atomically, using smart contracts, and programmatically at the end of the loan, like in 3 hours time, swap them back. And so we've reduced all of the risk around, hey, am I going to give you this collateral and not get it back? Or how do I go about entering into a secured financing application? So this has been hugely impactful. As I said, we're live. I think we put through about $180 billion of flow through the platform today, which is another way of saying blockchain can solve real problems in a really meaningful way. And this is all leveraging tokenization. And I know you have spoke about real estate tokenization. Yeah. I'd love to listen and hear more about that as well.
Yeah, so two things. I'm working at Struction, which is a direct to commercial subcontractor, direct lending, fintech. We did at the very early stages of this company. Do we do this on a blockchain? Is it time to think about that? And I was very firm with my co-founder and a couple of other folks on the team to say, guys, here in the case of blockchain here, this is a solution in search of a problem. And sorry, but a regular old database with on the cloud, it is just as modern and just as cloud native. There's no need. And one of the questions that I like to ask with regards to should I use a blockchain? And I'm sure you all have developed a guide related to this. I know I had to develop something like that because blockchain becomes the solution of the day, right? Everybody, we should do this in blockchain. Do you have a lot of multiple parties? I noticed the two use cases you shared, 400 banks, a lot of consortium, a lot of people getting together and working together. Whereas for us, and this is I'll give you another example, life insurance, which is my past history. There are multiple parties, but the main party is still the life insurer, and the other parties that participate in the transaction, eventually I think they'll get to a blockchain, but today they don't want to give up, medical records. Wait a minute, that's the value that I provide as a medical record provider. I'm not going to give it to you to load it on the blockchain. Then you have my data, or driver's license records, or other financial scores or anything like that. So the consortium of parties has to come together in order to participate in a blockchain related activity. I think that's very important. That leads me to a company that I'm advising. It's a company that is focused on tokenizing real estate properties. So think of a $35 million tower in downtown London, and you tokenize it into individual tokens of $1, and then you have a liquidity event. The owner of that property gets their money out, and anybody can. You don't have to be a accredited investor. You can buy one token, you can buy 1 million tokens, whatever you want to buy, and through that liquidity event. So that's tokenizing using NFTs to clearly establish partitions of the building that you can buy as a retail investor. So that's just another example.
Yeah, I love those examples because it shows it brings liquidity to these assets that are actually very illiquid, right?
Illiquid, yes, that is correct.
For economies. Yep.
That's correct. And the buzz around NFTs is all about these JPEGs, but that's a good example where an NFT can actually bring real value and a real use case to this whole thing. So, okay, so we talked about use cases. That brings to mind to me, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the things that you have seen? I'll get us started with one that I just alluded to, which is be careful not to think that blockchain is a hammer that you use for every nail. Blockchain is a solution, but you really need to understand when to use it, because one could argue that there's been many products in the history of mankind that have been invented, but the original purpose for the invention really didn't pan out. One that comes to mind is like the laser. The laser was invented 20 to 30 years before we started to use lasers in multiple applications. We didn't know what to use it for. Another example is the glass on our phones. That was invented 30 years before the actual Bill Gates called Corning and said, hey, can I use that stuff? And all of a sudden, Gorilla Glass became a thing. And there's a few others. There's medicines that were invented for a particular thing, but they realized it was a byproduct as a result of it. There's detergents that were invented for a particular thing out of Procter & Gamble, but eventually it was used for something else. So blockchain was invented for we've talked about it, immutable distributed database ledger, but be careful that you don't use it for every single business problem that you have, because you will create a blockchain hairball similar to the hairballs that we've invented in the past as IT people. So I remember the MQ series hairball. Do you, Tyrone? I remember the SharePoint hairballs, Lotus Domino and Lotus Notes hairballs. I mean, just complexity, because we as IT professionals will have a tendency to say, hey, that's a new thing. Let's use it for this business problem. Instead, have a guide, have an architect create some form of criteria for when you want to use blockchain.
Yeah, and maybe I can just add what some of those criteria could be. I think one is data silos. If there are lots of data silos in your business process or in your interactions with clients or your peers, etc., that if those silos were compressed or collapsed and you all had the same view of the world, then that's often a good indicator of, hey, blockchain could be super useful here, because when there are multiple data silos, that often leads to reconciliations between these processes, in incorrect representations of ownership or some piece of fact, and that just slows down the process and is also costly. So lots of data silos, you and your counterparty doing the same thing, sending each other reconciliations, that's a great indicator that, hey, there's actually a better technology than what you're using. Another one is related to that is information sharing and business processes, right? If you are doing a business process or workflow across a number of different parts of a value chain, that's also a potentially good place to leverage blockchain, because in addition to blockchain being used for data, it's also used for programming logic. You can actually share processes and agree on what the sequence of events should be and how something should move through a workflow. And so we see lots of value in that. And then the third one is really around value, right? If you are making payments or sending some assets digitally or otherwise, often you need to understand who the sender is, who the recipient is, who the owner is. There might be, in the case of a bond, coupons associated with that bond. So lots of post-fact lifecycle events. These things can actually be greatly simplified if you represent that asset on a blockchain, because the blockchain is really great, or a blockchain and the blockchain technology is really great at recording ownership and recording facts of how a particular asset should be represented and what happens when it's moved from one party to another. So I think those are three areas where you can actually start to apply this technology in the right way.
Yeah, makes sense.
Maybe I can also just quickly share some lessons that we've learned around how to successfully implement blockchain. And again, I'll just stick to three. One is be laser focused in scope. Don't try and do everything. Take the problem that you're trying to solve, find the smallest part of that problem that you realistically can solve, and really run towards doing that, and just be super clear about not expanding beyond that initial scope. The second is, you mentioned the use cases that I spoke about all deal with many participants, and there's a lot of collaboration. Actually, the way that we start projects is to be very, very small in that group. Don't try and bring everyone on at the same time, because you just will not get anywhere. You'll have misaligned incentives, people will work at different paces. Find the participants that are equally motivated, that are keen to try something new, that they have sponsorship, they have the funding to do that, and try and do it in a small group and bring a product to market that a very small group of you can prove actually adds value. That's how we grew the Link network from literally 3 banks to 400 in just over 2 years. And then the final one is keep the solution, the barrier to entry low. There's often a challenge with blockchain where the end state is so obvious. If I could just remove all of these things, everything would be so much easier. But doing that is really hard. And so if you can find a way to implement your new idea, but without having to change every process along the way at the same time, then you have a much higher likelihood of succeeding. And we've done that by building these applications a little bit off to the side, and then slowly integrating them and changing the existing processes.
It's interesting you share, focus, scope, keep it small, have the right experience. The more things change, the more things stay the same.
Regular way technology.
Incredible, because you could take those exact same words and apply it 20 years ago to your big CRM thing, or 10 years before to your big ERP thing, and 20 years before that, 1960s, to your mainframe implementation. The more things change, the more things change, the more things stay the same.
Yep.
Okay. So those are some interesting takeaways. I will add one more, Tyrone, which is if you have a lot of parties in your flow, bring them together with a blockchain as opposed to bringing them together with a centralized database. That could be also a reason why you do it, but they all have to be a participant and engaged and get value out of it, because if they don't, they're not going to participate and engage, period.
Yep.
Okay, so those are interesting takeaways. I think, let me just do a little check on time. We probably need to wrap this up. We can go on for 2 hours here.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna wrap us up with 2 topics. Number one, industries. So there's probably a lot of people from a cross section of industries. Certainly, you have an individual in me that comes out of the insurance space now in lending. You are in banking and other financial services. But there's other industries, and clearly blockchain with the cryptocurrencies has a bias towards financial. We talked about DeFi, we talked about real estate. But there's other industries that will benefit from this. I think supply chain will be a tremendous benefactor of blockchain technologies. Just think of that really expensive designer purse that you purchased for your wife, and you can scan the QR code that's inside the material, and it'll tell you exactly where you bought it, exactly in the boutique, what you paid, who the owner is, as opposed to being suspect of buying something on eBay that you have no idea whether it's a fake or a real one. Or think of food going through a supply chain and understanding what happens to that food throughout that process, and recording from the provenance where it came from all the way to the destination, all the temperature, and you can mix in IoT and you can mix in AI with supply chain to really give the participants in that chain an incredibly richer experience. A lot of buzz these days over what Facebook renamed themselves to Meta. I hope that there is a social media project that comes out that people migrate out of the centralized, controlled social media platforms. I just don't see it. I mean, but maybe we'll see what happens there. But I think social media is a place where it's also going to be somewhat tested with blockchain. And I'll give you one more that I think will be interesting going forward, and that is government. You talked about identity, especially in underdeveloped countries. Blockchain is going to bring some discipline to underdeveloped countries where identity could be interesting. How about voting? Voting could be interesting too, because you could have an immutable record of voting. But those are some not so obvious ones. What are you thinking in terms of industries? And in particular, how do you see in the world of financial services expanding and the marriage between traditional finance and decentralized finance?
Yeah, I mean, I think another industry that is already benefiting is the creator economy, right? We've seen with NFT, artists now actually being paid directly by the people that they're selling to, or musicians. And again, it comes back to this, the efficiencies that blockchain can bring by having this peer-to-peer interaction.
So I know there was a band called Kings of Leon, and they released their album as an NFT. And all the revenue went straight from the consumer to the band without what they explained to me, about 6 layers of middlemen. They take a cut out of all the music money. Interesting one.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm a bank, or rather, I work for a bank, and banks are one of the largest intermediaries in finance today. So, which is why we've actually created Onyx within JP Morgan, because we recognize not only the value of this technology, but how it's going to essentially change the way that finance can work. And so we're very, very much focused on how do we integrate some of these new ideas that, although they may seem fringe right now, are very quickly going to come into the mainstream. And so I think finance in general needs to recognize that there is a change coming and actually embrace it and you know, in some sense run towards it. And that's really very much what we're doing.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so let's wrap this up. I'll let you go first. And if you can just give me 2 actions that the audience can take home back to the ranch, so that they can perhaps talk to whoever they can talk to figure out how do they advance this ball forward. And I'll end by giving the audience 2 predictions that I see coming in the next 5 to 10 years related to blockchain. You go first.
2 actions are: go home and try and access a DeFi protocol. Go online, Google Uniswap or Compound Finance or Aave, and see what it's like to actually participate in this peer-to-peer new financial ecosystem. So that's action number 1. Action number 2 is download the Bitcoin white paper. There's a lot of skepticism about, you know, this new cryptocurrency, and obviously you should be skeptical in and around the investment aspect of it. But I think what people often misunderstand is how simple and elegant it actually is. The Bitcoin white paper is just 8 pages long. It's a very, very simple read, but it's very, very eye-opening in terms of the way that it's been implemented and the vision that it had. So I would say go and do those 2 things.
You know, when you mentioned the Bitcoin white paper, you just gave me chills, because that is a kind of a seminal moment. I do believe that 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we will look back at 2008, 2009, when that paper came out and the Bitcoin movement started, as a point in time in society and civilization that changed the world. We don't know it now, but it likely will happen in the future. So I'll end with this, 2 kind of fun predictions here. The first one is that in the US, you will be able to vote using your mobile phone in at least a municipality in our country powered by a blockchain. Immutable, identifiable, using the camera, recognizes you, you put in your vote, and there is no voting challenges like we've had in the past in this country and others. This is in particular very important to developing countries where some of the local governments there may be playing with the voting. I'm originally from Venezuela. I know all about that. Number 2, I do believe, and Tyrone, you're going to help bring this prediction to reality, I hope. I do believe that my bank, which happens to be Chase, will offer me products that are based on crypto sometime over the next 5 years. The ability to buy crypto, just like I buy my stock and my bonds and whatever other investments, will be right there inside of my banking app. I do believe that that will happen over the next 3 to 5 years. Tyrone, thank you very much. Really engaging conversation. We can go on forever. I know we got to cut it off. We got to let the crowd go back to whatever meeting they're going to. Yep. But this has been an enjoyable discussion.
No, thanks, Karl. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for listening.